The road to the White House is starting to look a little muddy. Some of the candidates going negative, as President Obama, for the most part, is staying above the fray, allowing his aides to beat up on the Republicans who want his job. Let's talk about it with David Drucker. He's a staff writer for Roll Call. The word is that the White House has pretty much decided that Mitt Romney is the guy to prepare for. Do you see it that way, David?
Well, I think it's far too early to tell who's going to win the primary. Clearly, Mitt Romney has a really good chance of winning, and polls have shown in a general election he might be the candidate that could do the most damage to President Obama. So I don't blame the president's campaign for planning on Mitt Romney and trying to prevent him from being the nominee. They're sort of thrown in their hat with the rest of the Republican field, other than Mitt Romney, and trying to get the former Massachusetts governor out of the race.
But the suggestion is that the campaigns that the president has run and won in the past, including essentially that long and sometimes bitter primary campaign against Hillary Clinton, involved a lot of negative attacks, but never uttered by Mr. Obama himself.
Well, that's the way you do it. Negative campaigning works, and candidates who refuse to go negative usually lose. The key is to allow the candidate himself or herself to look a little bit more positive and forward-thinking than the actual campaign on the ground. So you want your operatives, you want your surrogates, you want them to say all the mean, negative, nasty things that everybody says they hate. That's why, in fact, when looking for a vice presidential nominee, usually regardless of whether you're a Democrat or Republican, you're trying to look for somebody who can play the role of attack dog, because it's not something that voters tend to want out of a presidential candidate or incumbent office holder. What you want to do as an incumbent or as the candidate is say a few things that contrast yourself, clearly show the differences, but leave the real dirty stuff to the people working for you.
Well, it's interesting what's going on in the country right now because, as I mentioned to Karl Rove last hour, we've got 74% of Americans who believe this country is on the wrong track. We've got unemployment above 9%, which the president said we would never reach in his administration. And yet, people personally like him. They don't seem to think much of his policies, but they like him.
That's true, and that's something that Republicans have to watch for in the coming campaign. When voters like you personally, they're less receptive to personal attacks on character. Now, what I would watch for if I was the president, and all of the polling we've seen over the past couple of months, is that some surveys began to show a diminishment of his personal favorability. For the first time, I think in August and September, we saw some polls where he was below 50% in personal favorability. If that were to continue, then Republicans would have more leeway to go after him in terms of his character and who he is as a person. But if he can stay in the high 40s, low 50s, then they've got to focus on his policies. Of course, there's plenty there for them to go after in terms of policy.
David Drucker, who watches politics very closely at Roll Call. David, thanks.
Thank you.
And speaking of